I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV, radio, or the internet. Any advice given on this broadcast is purely for entertainment and research purposes only. Use at your own risk. This video complies with YouTube guidelines for science and education. Please enjoy the program. The Not So Secret Sauce Podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Did you miss me? Sorry, it's been a few weeks with Thanksgiving and everything, and been a lot of work going on behind the scenes. Not all podcast stuff, but different things. So decided that it's time to get back into it. So today we are going to cover what I call the beginner's guide to oral steroids, or oral androgenic anabolic steroids. I think orals we all know what testosterone does. We all have a good understanding of what decadurabolin does, or NPP, or things like that. But orals are kind of overly bro-scienced, I think is a good way to explain it. There's a lot of back and forth about different things, and I want to address some of that, as well as give you a little bit of background. I'm not hitting every oral steroid out there, mainly because this show, I try to keep it under an hour, and I've got a lot of questions, most of them on orals, but also because it would literally take days to just go through all of them. So first thing I want to address is the oral-only steroid cycle. Can you take an oral-only cycle? The answer is yes, you can, but should you? You can do anything you want to do. Just be open and honest with yourself. Understand that, there's going to be negatives to doing it. But in theory, yes, you can do a full oral-only cycle. The most common oral-only cycle that somebody would do would be D-ball. And it's been done many, many, many times successfully. The catch is that even oral steroids that aromatize are not going to produce enough estrogen to keep your estradiol levels high enough to where you just don't feel like crap. Every oral is going to be suppressive of your natural testosterone. Any anabolic androgenic steroid is going to suppress your natural testosterone, including orals. Your body detects the androgens and decides, hey, we don't need to produce testosterone. When you stop producing testosterone, if you're not adding it exogenously, you're also going to stop producing estrogen. So you could, in theory, do about 6 weeks of an oral-only cycle, make a few gains, but then you get into how much of a dosage do you have to run to get enough gains to make up for the lack of testosterone and estrogen. So my personal opinion, can you run an oral-only cycle? Yes, you can. Should you? No, you should not. Take test. Also, my own personal opinion, and this is my podcast, so I get to express my opinion and you get to listen to it. The only people that are interested in doing a oral-only cycle are people that, one of two things. Either they feel they have to hide their usage and they can't hide syringes and vials and all that stuff. Or two, they're too scared to give themselves shots. That's what it boils down to 90% of the time when I talk to people, when I talk to clients, and we get down to the nuts and bolts of everything. They don't want to have to give themselves shots. Sorry, If you want to do steroids, you're going to give yourself shots. It's that simple. Suck it up, deal with it, or don't do it. Once again, I don't care what you do and what you don't do. My job is to provide information. But I'm here to tell you, if you want to be successful in using anabolic androgenic steroids, if you want to join the anabolic brotherhood, you've got to go in with both feet and understand you're going to give yourself shots twice a week, at the minimum, twice a week. You get used to it. I've been doing it for years, 2 to 3 times a week for my TRT. It doesn't bother me anymore. And at one point in time, I mean, you can see I've got tattoos. At one point in time, I couldn't even go get a tattoo without having the artist have ink on the needle before I sat down because I couldn't see the sharps because I would freak out. When I found out that I was going to be on testosterone for the rest of my life, it was a bit disconcerting that I was going to have to give myself shots. But you get used to it. And now I don't even think twice about it. As a matter of fact, I usually film this on Wednesdays. I take my shots on Wednesdays and Sundays. So when this is done, I'm going to go in the bathroom, pop a quarter cc of testosterone in my shoulder, and get ready for bed. So anyway, so let's start going over. What's up, Dominic? So I'm going to start. These are in no real particular order, but I'm going to go over the 4 most commonly used orals by beginners. Your advanced users, you have a lot more tools in your toolbox than these 4, but if you're going to take an oral steroid, one of these 4 is the way to go. When you're starting, they are the most common, therefore that we have the most knowledge on them. And actually 3 out of the 4 are prescription medications. So we're just going to start with the most common, which is Anavar, oxyandrolone. The therapeutic dose, which is classified as what it would be prescribed by a doctor. Now, when I say that these are prescription medications, they are prescribed in very rare circumstances, but because they're prescriptions, there have been studies done on them. And you know what? I'm mad at myself because I meant to say this earlier. Before I get into the individuals, one of the things I want to address is liver damage and hepatotoxicity around oral steroids. Yes, oral steroids are hepatotoxic. They do increase liver enzyme values. Increased liver enzyme values are not an indication of direct liver damage. They can be, but that does not mean they are. Any oral medication you take is hepatotoxic. Most prescription drugs that you take orally are actually more hepatotoxic, more damaging to your liver than an oral steroid. There are some exceptions. There are some orals that are very hepatotoxic. Halotestin, for example, is very oral toxic. You cannot take it for an extended period of time without causing some liver damage. Now, that being said, you could take 2,000 milligrams of D-bol. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to cause acute liver damage. Liver damage, permanent liver damage, is caused over time. The vast majority of oral anabolic steroids are not going to cause long-term liver damage if they are cycled correctly. That's the key point. Cycled correctly. Every steroid has recommended doses. Every last one of these 4 has a recommended dose. They also have a recommended time frame. If you choose to do 200 milligrams a day of Anavar for 16 weeks, you will have liver damage. If you choose to drink heavily every day for 16 weeks, you will have liver damage. If you choose to take an excessive amount of Advil every day, you will have liver damage. Oral steroids, for the most part, are not going to cause permanent liver damage if used correctly. Like I said, 3 of these are actual prescription medications and are prescribed for up to 16-week cycles. That means that a doctor prescribing them under the right circumstances believes that the tiny amount of liver toxicity that you're going to get from it is a valid trade-off for the good it's going to do you. Bro science will tell you you shouldn't take orals at all. They're going to screw up your liver. It's going to mess you up. You're going to get jaundice and all this other stuff. Once again, can you? Yes, absolutely, if you abuse it. Just like you can get liver damage if you abuse alcohol. Just like you can get liver damage if you abuse prescription drugs. Just like you can get liver damage if you abuse NSAIDs. Don't abuse it. Understand that you're going to be on an oral for a short period of time, a relatively short period of time. You're going to make some gains and you're going to come off of it. That being said, I don't want to hear a bunch of back and forth. Actually, I don't care if you comment back and forth about the liver toxicity, because every comment on YouTube boosts me in the algorithm. It just means more people are going to watch, more people are going to join the debate. So housekeeping, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, all that fun stuff. Leave comments for the next episode, that kind of thing. Anyway, back to Anavar. Anavar is a DHT-based oral steroid. Which means because it's DHT based, it is classified as a dry compound, which means it does not aromatize into estrogen. It's mainly used for cutting. Can you bulk on it? You can, but there are much better options. So if I'm going to take something, I'm going to take it for its intended use, which would be Anavar would be cutting. It's used as a cutting compound, one, because it's dry and it doesn't aromatize, so you don't get the excess estrogen. 2, it does an amazing job of preserving lean muscle mass. That's actually what it's prescribed for. AIDS patients, osteoporosis, even burn victims. Most of these are prescribed for the same thing. They're to stop and reverse weight loss in people that are prone to that. That doesn't mean that, your doctor's going to prescribe it to you because you're scared when you go on your cut, you're going to drop 10 pounds of lean tissue. No, medically necessary. Cancer patients that literally, have trouble eating and they need every gram of protein to actually be used by their body could be put on a dose of Anavar. The therapeutic dose is 0.1 milligram per kilogram of body weight, which means 100 kilogram person to roughly 200 pounds. I think it's 220 actually. But in that neighborhood would be prescribed 20 milligrams a day for up to 16 weeks. Then they would need to come off for the recommended 4 weeks to let their liver enzymes reset. Then they would go back on because, once again, there's a medical need for this. That being said, we as bodybuilders, doing an 8-week cycle of Anavar at a reasonable dose, 25 milligrams a day, it's not going to hurt us. It's only going to help. Unless you have pre-existing liver issues, and you shouldn't be taking orals if you have pre-existing liver issues. It's not a good thing to do. Anavar's got a half-life of around 8 to 12 hours. Different people process. I've never been a fan of people saying the half-life is exactly 8 hours. No, depending on your metabolism, depending on how fast you metabolize drugs, depending on how fast you digest things, depending on how fast your liver processes, the half-life changes. So on average, it's around 8 to 12 hours. That does not mean that it's not effective after 8 to 12 hours. That just means that's the half-life of the drug in your system. Once the drug has attached to the receptors in your cells, that's when the action begins. So that can still go on after that period of time. I'll get to that in a little bit. Anavar is relatively side effect free. It is one of the least, has the least amount of side effects for the amount of gain that you get from it. But the big side effect on it is it will seriously mess with your cholesterol. It can drop your HDL by up to 50%. That's huge. And it can increase your LDL by around 30%. Neither one of those numbers is like an extreme. That's actually kind of common. So if you have cholesterol issues, Anavar is not for you whatsoever. But if you have really bad cholesterol issues, you really shouldn't be on gear in the first place. Let's get you healthy before you start doing gear. The cool thing about Anavar is it's one of the few steroids that is safe. For those of you listening, I'm doing big air quotes here. Safe for females to use. Females are exceptionally sensitive to androgens because their body doesn't produce the androgens that a male does. You know, we as males kind of have a tolerance for them. Females, not so much because they don't usually have those elevated levels. That being said, one of the side effects of any female taking any androgen is the risk of virilization. For lack of a better term, developing male traits. Deepening of voice, growing facial hair, clitoral enlargement. I could literally do a whole podcast just on how that works. But yeah. But Anavar is part of what makes it one of the most popular orals is the fact that women can use it. Effective dosages for what we do. For males, between 20 and 50 milligrams a day. I usually suggest you start out at around 20 to 25 per day. Do a cycle. See how it works out for you. And then, you know, if you want to up at the next cycle, up at the next cycle. Females, much, much lower. Like I said, females, you know, they do they have a higher affinity for using the androgens. So it's roughly 8 to 10 times. So ideally, if you can find like 5 milligram Anavar tabs, women should be starting at 2.5 milligrams per day. Literally cut a 5 milligram in half and take it in the morning. Which brings me to, once a female has assessed the side effects, then she can get into up to around 5 to 10 milligrams. Unless you are a female stepping on a bodybuilding stage, and I'm not talking physique, I'm not talking bikini, I'm talking bodybuilding. You have no reason to go above 10 milligrams. It's not worth it. As with any drug, the more you increase the dose, the more likely you're going to get side effects. And the side effects are going to be that much more pronounced for a female. So, yeah, we want to start low and work our way up. So that's all the basics on Anavar. I could literally do, and there are people that do entire shows going over each one of these drugs, but it's a lot of stuff that beginners don't need to know. Basically, as beginners, you just need a little bit of background on it. How much do I take? When do I take it? That kind of stuff. All right. Since we're on the subject of what females can take, I'm going to go talk about Winstrol. Um, Winstrol is a little bit more side effect heavy than Anavar, but not much. It's also a DHT derived compound, and it also has a half-life of around 8 to 12 hours. Where Winstrol and Anavar really differ, they're both good cutting drugs. They're both good because they don't aromatize and stuff like that. Where Winstrol shines is that it drastically affects SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. That's the chemical in our body, the enzyme in our body that attaches to testosterone and renders it inert. So by Winstrol attaching to that, there's less of it to attach to the testosterone. So that gives you a higher free test number. Once again, you've got to be taking tests to get that number, because if you're not taking tests, that number is going to plummet once your body stops producing it. So you definitely don't want to do a Winstrol only cycle, because the best effect is the lowering of SHBG. And if you don't have any tests, you're not going to have any free tests anyway. Winstrol is really good at preserving lean tissue. It's also prescribed to AIDS patients, people with osteoporosis, people that they need to protect that small amount of lean tissue that they have. Winstrol is actually really functional, really good for functional athletics. So, like, it's one of those drugs that, if you're a baseball player, and I'm of course not talking MLB or any major thing, but and college kids shouldn't be taking steroids anyway, but it's going to give you those functional edges. It's going to make you run a little bit faster, hit a little bit harder, things like that. So it's good for that. In the gym, it's going to make you a little bit stronger, make it a little bit easier to have the energy to survive your workouts, those kinds of things. It's really good for functionality. It's also one that women can take because it's a DHT-based drug. And that doesn't mean that every DHT-based drug a female can take, but this one is one that they can. The big issue, the big side effects on Winstrol, it dries your joints out. And the leaner you are, the more it's going to do that, because there's no water retention. And because it's not testosterone based, it doesn't add to your estrogen pool. So it's going to basically take the water out of your joints. And the leaner you are, the better the better it works, actually. If you have a high body fat percentage, Winstrol is going to work, but Winstrol is mostly a performance and cosmetic enhancing drug, and you're not going to get any of the cosmetics if you have too high of a body fat percentage. Still good for preserving lean tissue. It's still going to be effective for those purposes. I can't stand when people say, well, the drug is useless if you're over 15% body fat. No, it's not. Same thing people talk about with clenbuterol. It's a drug. It still does its function. Just because you don't get the visual effects of that function does not mean that it's not functioning correctly. Just means that you're not at a place where that makes a big enough difference to visually see. Dosaging, between 10 and 30 milligrams per day for males, 5 to 10 milligrams for females. Same reasons as Anavar, not going to rehash all of that. So those are your two baseline orals for cutting. And they're as such because they're really good, because they're DHT based, dry, non-estrogenic. So let's get into bulking. Now, You cannot talk about oral steroids at all, and especially about bulking on oral steroids, without talking about Dianabol. And yes, it is Dianabol. The inventor's wife's name was Diana, and he named it after her. Um, whether or not that's bro science, I think it's super cute. I've read different things, stating that. So at least in my head, it's canon. It's Dianabol. We call it D-ball for short. And on the forums and stuff where we don't actually call stuff by name, we'll actually put D and then like a basketball or a soccer ball or something like that. And, we all know what it means. Those of us in the anabolic brotherhood, there's some code we have to use, but, we're good at it. D-ball is the most popular bulking oral steroid because it works. It was developed over in Eastern Europe and heavily tested by government-sponsored sports programs. Bottom line is it works. If you get real D-ball, it works. It drastically increases protein synthesis, which is the rate at which your muscles and your body build new protein. Muscles are made out of protein. So it is estrogenic, but it doesn't turn to normal excuse me. It does not turn to normal estradiol. It turns into methyl estradiol, which is actually more potent than normal estradiol. So it aromatizes, but not only does it aromatize, it aromatizes into shit that's more potent than what test aromatizes to. As such, gyno and high estrogen side effects are a definite be on the lookout for if you decide to use D-ball. It is more liver toxic than Anavar, but still not grossly bad. Like I said, if you're cycling on and off of these and using them, in appropriate ranges, you're not going to have, most of the time, you're not going to have liver issues. D-ball is probably also one of the most heavily studied oral steroids because of the government sponsorships and everything over in Europe. Clinically proven at 50 milligrams a day to put on 10 pounds of lean mass on an 8-week cycle. That's also assuming, like I said, this was a state-sponsored program for athletes. They were going balls to the wall in the gym. They were getting optimum nutrition, things like that. But it's also been pretty common bro science that, yeah, you can expect that. One of the big drawbacks to D-ball is it does increase intramuscular water retention. So it actually increases the amount of water inside your muscles. So what usually happens is when people get on a D-ball cycle is they blow up. Muscles just blow up. Then they come off the cycle. That water is no longer inside their muscles because they're not taking the drug that put it there. And they're like, oh no, I lost all my gains. No, you lost water and glycogen in your muscles. You still have lean tissue gains. How much lean tissue you gain depends entirely on your diet and training intensity while you're on the drugs. But you didn't lose your gains. You lost size due to water retention. And some people have issues with that. They can't get that part through their head, or they just don't want to believe it. But it's a known action of the drug. So if you decide to use it, expect the fact that when you come off, you are going to be smaller than what you looked like at your biggest during the bulk. But it's just losing water. If you put on 20 pounds of mass, which is a misnomer because you don't put on pounds of mass, but you increase your body weight by 20 pounds, which it will be a combination of water, body fat, and lean tissue. And then you come off D-ball, and then 4 weeks later, after your hormones are balanced, your body's had time to process everything, you're still 12 pounds heavier than you were when you started. Okay, well, you've lost most of the water. Assuming that period of time you're trying to lose some body fat, you still have pounds of muscle and fat that you added. You start at, let's say you started this at 12% body fat, you ended at 16%, you cut back down to 12, and now you're 5 pounds heavier than you were before you started the cycle, this whole thing. You gained 5 pounds of muscle. You didn't lose any of your gains. You just got yourself down to where you can finally figure out what those gains actually are. So, take that for what you will. All right, and I have notes on this. I'm not going to lie. The last podcast that I did, which actually has not been released, I have not released it because in the process of editing it, I realized that I was so all over the place that nobody could have followed it. And I'm actually going to be re-recording it either this weekend or the first part of next week to actually release, because it was good content. It just, there was no way anybody was making heads or tails of it. So, all right, our last one we're going to cover, and then we're going to get into some listener questions, is Anadrol, A-bombs, A50s, oxymethylone, Oxy. It's a DHT-based compound. It was also heavily studied. It is super popular amongst strength athletes. And the reason for that is that it produces almost immediate, noticeable strength gains. When you can lift heavier, you're going to build more muscle. That's how it works. When you can increase the stimulus, you're going to increase what your body can adapt to and build muscle. It also has a lot more side effects than the others. But like every other drug, the side effects are dose dependent. Kind of going out of the order that I've done for previous ones. But this one, to kind of explain the awesomeness of Oxy, kind of got to. The recommended dosage for bodybuilding is between 25 and 100 milligrams per day. My personal recommendation, just like every other steroid, is use the lowest effective dose that you can. Don't just jump on the highest dose. Start low. It may take you a few cycles to build up to 100 milligrams. First cycle you do 25, you get along great. Next cycle do 50. Okay, you get along great. No real sides. Next cycle do 75. Okay, you get along great. No sides. Then you can try 100. At 100 milligrams, it is going to be fairly liver toxic. The recommended dosage is between 25 and 50 milligrams. But it is not uncommon for it to be used upwards of 100 milligrams to around 150. Once again, I don't recommend that. But here's kind of the awesome thing, but also kind of a crappy thing. In almost every study, at least every study that I've seen on it, Anadrol is very effective for the first 3, maybe 4 weeks. Then you hit a plateau, period. You plateau. You're going to get strength gains. You're going to get muscle gains. And then just boom, you're done. It's awesome I mean, it's crappy because, it's 3 to 4 weeks. It's not a huge, most orals you run 6 to 8 weeks. But the cool part is if you know you're not going to make the gains after, say, 4 weeks, why would you keep taking it after 4 weeks? We all know how I am about health phases. So it's one of those things that, you could throw it on the back end of a cycle for the last 4 weeks and, make some nice gains at the tail end of the cycle. Or let's say you're running a 16-week testosterone cycle. You could run it for 3 weeks at the beginning, hit that plateau, come off, let your body normalize. In the meantime, you spent those 3 weeks getting stronger. Your body's going to retain some of that strength. And then the last 3 weeks of the cycle, do it again. So you finish the cycle with those strength gains, which should be higher than your initial strength gains. There's a little bit more finesse to using it. But it's probably, if I had to pick a favorite oral, it's going to be Anadrol, Oxy, A-bombs. Super popular amongst professionals for bulking because you get those strength gains. And the stronger we get, the more motivated we're getting. I mean, let's not bullshit. Those of us in the anabolic brotherhood, the more we can bench, the more we can deadlift, the more we can squat, the more motivated we are. We're at the end of the day, we're all bros. We want to be hitting 3 plates, and having a compound that helps you do that is definitely going to give you the motivation. And at the end of the day, the motivation is worth almost as much as the drug itself. Now, the last thing I want to say on it, it also has a long half-life. It's about 16 hours on the half-life. So if you're sensitive to orals in the concept of they upset your stomach, you can actually try taking it the night before, and it'll still be in your system, through the better part of the next day. And then you still have the remaining action that it produces in the cells after that. So, it's a thought. I've had clients do that, and with varying degrees of success, but overall pretty good. Me personally, I actually cannot take any orals. It has nothing to do with the orals. It has nothing to do with my liver. It has to do with the fact that my digestion is wrecked by the binding agents. I actually can't. It's very rare that I can take anything in a pill form for more than 3 or 4 days before I am just continuously nauseous. Even Tylenol. Like, I can take the gel tabs, but I can't take the solid pills. There's a binding agent that holds all that together, and that binding agent just tears me up. I actually would love to try just loose powder without the, measured out amounts of loose powder without the binding agents, almost like a goodies powder, but of Anadrol. I think it'd be the coolest thing ever, just rip the top off and, take it, see if that makes a difference. Because I can take goodies powders because there's no binding agents in it. But I cannot take Tylenol or Advil or naproxen, or when I hurt my shoulder, they put me on, damn, I forgot the name of it. They put me on a 4-day long oral steroid. Caused me to retain so much water, but it destroyed my appetite after the second day, and it was only available in a pill form. I actually try to get most of my prescriptions in a liquid form for that reason, so that I can take them without being nauseous, because I can't grow if I can't eat, and that boils down to all orals. They have been known to wreck people's digestion. And if you can't eat, you can't grow. It doesn't matter how many drugs you have in your system. If you're not getting the protein and the calories in your system, you're not going to grow. You have to fuel your body. You could put the nicest wheels on a car. You could throw the most bitchin' ass supercharger on it, throw an awesome paint job on it, the whole 9 yards. But if you ain't got gas in the tank, it ain't going nowhere. Same concept. So there's your introduction to orals. Simple, beginners. If you're female, super low dosages of either Anavar or Winstrol. I suggest Anavar. If you're going to do one, just because it works better. If you're male, you've got more of a selection. Aren't we lucky like that? It's one of the few things we actually have a bigger selection on. But once again, stay within the suggested guidelines. Don't abuse them. Don't be on them for more than 6 weeks or so. Take liver support supplements if you want, but at the end of the day, and if you're on orals, do not go out drinking on the weekends. Let's not compound things that cause liver damage. And you'd be surprised how often that happens. You got your 20-something-year-old guys that go out and party. They're on a test DECA D-ball cycle. All of a sudden, 4 weeks in, their liver starts giving them shit. They're like, oh, well, the D-ball screwed up my liver. Nah, brah, it might be the 13 drinks that you have had every Friday and Saturday night for the past 4 weeks on top of the D-ball. But yeah, it's always got to be the steroids' fault, Anyway, off my soapbox. I've got a bunch of questions. Hey, I meant to put that up earlier. Yep. And please leave your questions in the comments. Every one of them helps boost me in the algorithms. And if you're in the forums and somebody asks a question that one of these shows answers, feel free to link it in there. I can't do it because almost every one of these groups has rules against self-promotion, but you can do it. All right. Let's start here. I'm taking Sus 250 at 500 a week and Tren 100 at 300 a week. How much oral anadrol can I take without hitting my liver too hard? Or should I stick to pinning and go to D-ball instead for my bulk cycle? Okay, Tony. Well, it's going to depend on how much you can tolerate either drug. They are both about as equally liver toxic. And like I've been talking about all podcast, it's really not that big a deal. So long as you're taking precautions, you're not going out drinking, things like that. Not taking NSAIDs every day, that kind of thing. Me personally, on 500, 300, I'd start with 25 milligrams of anadrol. Just because it's a DHT drug, and that would give you a test-based drug, because Sustanon is testosterone. Tren is a nandrolone-based drug, so you'd have your nandrolone group in there, and then you can have the DHT compound in there. With the Tren, you're not going to see, the biggest thing you're going to get from the anadrol is the strength gains. So, yeah, anadrol. I'd go anadrol 25 milligrams a day for this cycle. If you get along good with it, you decide to run the same exact cycle again, then you could bump it up to, to around 50 and still wouldn't hit your liver too hard. And that's also going to vary from person to person. What, Tony, what you consider hitting your liver too hard, I don't know how much you drank when you were younger. I don't know how much you still drink, things like that. And all that makes a difference. But just like everything else that I say, you got to experiment. You got to try it. You got to see what works for you. All right. What is the max dose I should be taking of D-ball? See what I meant about, let's see, right underneath my finger, right there. It's a soccer ball. D-ball. We do that in the Anabolic Brotherhood to throw off algorithms. What's the max dose I should be taking of D-ball? Is it safe to take more than one oral at a time? Can I take Clen while cruising? All right, Dominic, we're going to start at the beginning. What is the max dose I should be taking of D-ball? Depends what other compounds you're on, what other things you do for your liver. Assuming that you're not doing anything else to harm your liver, the max would be around 75 to 100 milligrams. I actually think that's too much. I think that 50 milligrams over a 6-week course gives you the best gains while on cycle. I don't think that upping that dose that much makes as much of a difference. You'll get more on the jump from 0 to 25 than you will the jump from 25 to 50. And you'll get more on the jump from 25 to 50 than you will the jump from 50 to 75. So balancing, you got to balance out health and risk factors and side effects, et cetera, et cetera. You asked the maximum dose. I would suggest 25 milligrams, but the maximum dose I would be comfortable putting a client on would be around 50. Is it safe to take more than one oral at a time? It's not safe to take anything. Relatively speaking, there is no such thing as a safe steroid, but that's not what you're technically asking. What you're asking is it going to cause an obscene amount of damage if I take 2 orals at the same time? Depends on dosage. I wish I could just give you a straight answer, but there isn't one. It depends on the person. It depends on the dosage. Could you get by with, say, taking 10 milligrams of Anadrol and 10 milligrams of D-bol? Yeah. People have done it. Could you get by with 50 and 50? That's a whole different story. Could you? Maybe. Depends on you. Do I recommend taking more than one? No. I actually don't ever recommend taking more than, I can't say ever. It's rare that I would ever recommend taking more than 2 injectables and 1 oral, or any combination of 3 compounds, only for the simple fact that once you start getting side effects, it's hard to tell which compound is causing those particular side effects. Can I take Clen while cruising? Absolutely. You can take Clen anytime you want. Clenbuterol is an asthma medication. I actually covered this in the last podcast, the one that I didn't release because it's all over the place. But I'll cover Clen in depth on that one. And that one will actually be released before this one. So for that one, I'm going to say, Dominic, go back and watch the podcast on fat burners. And that'll answer everything you want to know about taking Clen. All right. Roger, how liver safe or toxic is Anavar in comparison to drinking every other weekend? Other than NAC, N-acetylcysteine, and milk thistle, what are some good harm reduction mitigating compounds or foods? How liver safe or toxic is Anavar in comparison to drinking every other weekend? That's going to depend on your dosages and how much you're drinking. If you're having a beer, I would say that 50 milligrams of Anavar every day is going to be more liver toxic than having a beer every weekend. However, most people don't drink a beer. Most people drink a case of beer. So when you start getting into that amount of alcohol, or a half dozen mixed drinks or things like that, chances are the drinking is going to be more liver toxic. What you definitely don't want to do is combine the two. Then you definitely have some liver toxicity going on. So once again, it's going to depend on dosages of both. I mean, alcohol is a drug and there are dosages in it. Like I said, if you're having a beer, maybe 2, I'd say the Anavar is going to be worse. If you're having a couple of beers at the club and a couple of drinks, you're the drinking is going to be more liver toxic. But it's funny that we don't talk about how going out to the club every weekend and having a couple of drinks and trying to find you a hottie to hook up with, how liver toxic that is, But you talk about taking an oral steroid and people will jump your ass about them being liver toxic when chances are the alcohol is more liver toxic. It's just more socially acceptable. I mean, I catch crap for even doing this podcast because I openly talk about steroids. And it's like, oh my God, how could you? Well, it's because it's something I know about and I like talking about it. If you don't like it, don't watch. Other than NAC and milk thistle, what are some good harm reduction mitigating compounds or foods? Foods, I'll be honest, I'm not sure of. I do know that getting enough fiber helps in every aspect of your body. So, high fiber foods are gonna help. A fiber supplement's gonna help. The thing about NAC and milk thistle, there's a lot of stuff out there that's labeled as liver protection, but if you actually read the ingredients, it's mostly NAC and milk thistle, just in different combinations. Ginkgo biloba has been shown to help a little bit, but not nearly as much as NAC. But once again, it's not something to be overly concerned about. If you want to take something to protect your liver, that's always a good thing. But NAC and milk thistle will be more than enough. All right. Jeremy, what's a good cutting agent? How much to take and how long should I take it? I did a whole podcast on this. Now, if you're talking about cutting agent, I'm assuming you're talking about fat burner. And just like I said a few minutes ago, before this one is released, go back to the previous episode, which I'll link up somewhere up. I'll link up somewhere. This camera's backwards. Somewhere up here, there will be a box that I'll link it into. Just watch that and it'll cover all the fat burners. As far as if you're talking about an anabolic to take while cutting, a relatively low test base with an Anavar or a Winstraw will help you maintain muscle mass while you're in a calorie deficit, but they are not direct fat burners. Steroids are not fat burners. I'll say that a million times over. Steroids are not fat burners. Fat burners are fat burners. Steroids are steroids. Steroids protect muscle. Fat burners burn fat. The closest argument you can make that steroids help you lose weight is that they increase your lean muscle mass. Increasing your lean muscle mass increases your base metabolic rate, which over time will cause you to burn more calories than you could consume, theoretically, depending on how much you're consuming, and would cause you to burn body fat. There you go. How much to take and how long to take it, that's going to depend on which one you take. If you're talking about fat burners, that'll all be covered in the other one. Anavar or Winstraw, like I said, 4 to 6 weeks, and then come off of it. All right. Now this one's a little more advanced. How do you take Superdrol? And does it work? Superdrol is an oral. It's a little bit more advanced than the 4 that I covered. 10 to 50 milligrams, depending on your tolerance, taken daily. My problem with Superdrol is that it's a very heavily counterfeited steroid. Assuming most of us are getting our gear, most of us in the Anabolic Brotherhood are using Underground Labs. And it's not that the Underground Labs are counterfeiting it. It's been my experience that the labs are trying to provide, for the most part, you've got scammers out there, but for the most part, the labs want to provide a quality product because they want to keep getting your money. And just like any other business, if any of y'all have ever watched the second Kingsman movie, I highly relate to the the antagonist in that movie, she's built a multi-million-dollar business empire, but she's selling drugs instead of doing it, like Bill Gates or somebody. And she's literally the most successful businesswoman in the world, but she gets no credit for it because she did it selling illegal drugs. A lot of UGLs are like that. They want your business. They want the money. They want repeat customers. I actually think it's the people over in China that sell the raw powders. It's like 96% of the raw powders that are used to make Underground Lab AAS come from China. I actually feel like they will label something and it not be what it is, but it'll have a similar effect. I can't say I've seen because I don't have a lab to test everything. I do have access to someone who has access to a lab that has tested things for me before, but it's very expensive and he has to work it in so that he doesn't get in trouble, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that I've never bothered to have tested, but Superdraw is known to be one of the more counterfeited ones. It usually will end up being D-ball. But assuming you have a good source that actually does get actual Superdraw, does it work? Yes, it absolutely works. But just like every other AAS out there, it all comes down to your diet and your intensity and training. So take that into consideration. All right. Now I saved this one for last because can oral tea be taken without harsh liver effects and still high bioavailability? Have you heard of a new oral tea medication that I think the FDA approved and is liver safe and effective? Yes, Nathan, I actually, until you sent this question, I had not heard of this. So I immediately hopped into some research and only found one or two articles about it. Just like everything else relating to this, mainstream media is not going to cover this because, without getting political, just what I've noticed, nobody wants us to have access to these things. TRT wouldn't be looked down on, etc. But that's a whole philosophical discussion. So yes, I found one article about it. I did read that. It looks promising, but it also looks like that it's still not a super high bioavailability. The testing that they did was mostly in seniors. I think the average age was 64 years old. A few of them were hypogonadal to begin with. And it didn't give exact numbers. It said that it produced enough testosterone to get them within range. That's where I have a question on it, because within range, depending on what doctor you talk to, means something totally different. At one point in time, my total test level was under 200, and I was considered in range. I was also 24 years old. If you break it down by age group, I was in range for an 80-year-old man. So I'd like to know, and I'll do more research on it. I'd like to know what they mean by in range. I know they've been working on this for a while. And if they can perfect it, it totally changes the game. It totally changes the game because, like I said earlier, oral-only cycles are not really feasible. That's the word I'm looking for, feasible. Because you're not going to have the estrogen from the testosterone conversion, et cetera, et cetera. But if we had oral available testosterone that actually was bioavailable to a high enough degree that it would put your total test at around 800 to 1100, then that makes oral only cycles completely feasible. You could literally take a testosterone pill and D-ball and run with it. So it would completely change the game. But I also see something, because it could do that, I also see it being very heavily regulated. I also see it being faked very, very. I see a high probability of it being faked and being marketed. But bear in mind, if this just got FDA approval, it's still going to be another 5 to 10 years before anyone in the UGL market is going to have a viable source for it. So John, my test before 56 nanograms. Holy shit. Oh my God, bro. I feel for you. Like I said, I was in a motorcycle accident and did some damage down there, and it basically destroyed my testosterone production. And so I've been on TRT for years, but yeah, I don't think I ever got that low. Jesus. I mean, 56 nanograms per deciliter, you might as well just not even be producing. I bet you, John, I bet you feel infinitely better being on actual TRT and having decent test levels. Guys, that's all my questions. So leave your questions in the comments. That way I can answer more questions, because I like answering y'all's questions. My goal is to eventually have enough questions to where I can't get to all of them in one show. Now, ironically, the show that I have to re-record, I didn't have but one question on that one. But once again, I was kind of just all over the place with that one. And I want to make sure that, the information I'm conveying is not only, truthful and accurate. I also want to make sure that it's easy to follow. You can have the best information in the world given to you, but if it's all over the place, it's useless. So, but yeah, that's all I got today, guys. Thank y'all for, listening to me and the guys in the live feed that have been here. I appreciate that. And, y'all be lucky because you're getting 2 shows this week. Sorry you had to wait. But y'all have a good one, and thank you for watching.